Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com here with the top 10 cards that I want to brew around from Core Set 2019. Now, this isn't a list of cards that are necessarily spiky or the best cards out of the set. They're just cards that I personally want to sleeve up and throw in a deck and see how well they work. So if you're looking for a top 10 most powerful cards, maybe you should look somewhere else. If you're looking for cards that are fun to brew around, this is my top 10 list. Now, 2019 has a lot of reprints that I actually do like to maybe spice up standard, and I'm not going to include them in this list, and I'm also not going to include popper cards. I'll probably have a completely separate video for the popper cards that I want to brew around, but I am going to hurry and mention as my honorable mentions the cards that are getting reprinted that I do want to throw in a standard deck. The first card I want to mention is a Johnie's Pridemate. If you've been following the channel for a while now, you know that I have a pet deck for Modern called Soul Sisters, and a Johnie's Pridemate is the focal point for the Soul Sisters build. So whenever I can throw this in a standard deck, I'm always going to try to brew around it. I think a Johnie's Pridemate's in a good place right now for standard, as it does have a couple of 1-drops that synergize with it, one being Legion's Landing, which is just an all-star in the Soul Sisters Modern deck, as well as the newly printed a Johnny's Welcome, which says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. So it's a kind of a Soul Sister on an enchantment. Now, I don't like a Johnny's Welcome as much as I like other traditional Soul Sisters, because they usually trigger off each other, and a duplicate of Johnny's Welcome will not trigger off itself or additional copies of it. So that is, in my opinion, a downside to it. The upside to a card like a Johnny's Welcome is that it's harder to remove than just a 1/1 Soul Sister. Another card is Mentor of the Meek. One of my current decks that I like to play in standard is Oketra's Monument, and I think that Mentor of the Meek is the perfect card to put in Oketra's Monument. One of the problems with Oketra's Monument is it can run out of gas. Mentor of the Meek can keep your hand full. You reduce the cost of creatures with Oketra's Monument, and you can just use that extra mana to then draw a card. So I like the reprinting of Mentor of the Meek. Next one is Scape Shift. Scape Shift is an interesting card right now in Standard because we already have the Ramen Excavator, as well as Crucible of Worlds getting also a reprint in Core Set 2019. And we have a ton of utility lands. So anything from the memorials, especially like Memorial to Unity or Memorial to Folly, and the deserts, utility deserts like the Ifnir Deadlands, I think can be used for kind of a value-based land deck, and then you can pair it with cards like Hour of Promise, and that's not a bad little mix. I can think that some sort of Jund or even Black-Green or maybe even Sultai, really grindy and using your land as the value, could definitely see some play. So I'm keeping my eye on Scape Shift builds for standard. And last but not least, another sort of pet card of mine for quite some time is Guttersnipe. Guttersnipe has a lot of good cards to pair it with, especially in blue. Red's got a lot of these cantrip cards like Crash Through. There's like even Ryle that can work with Guttersnipe. But blue offers things like Opt, and even Anticipate is getting a reprint, and that's usually where Guttersnipe shines. Another card like Dive Down can keep it protected. It has all the makings for having a sort of blue-red tempo, as Guttersnipe being the win condition of the deck. Alright, so now that we have the reprints out of the way, let's actually get down to the top 10 list of cards from Core Set 2019 that I want to brew around. Coming in at number 10 is Diamond Mare. Crested Sunmare has been a pet card of mine when it was spoiled out of Hour of Devastation that I've been trying to get to work, but the lack of cards that actually gain life the turn that Crested Sunmare come out, if we're not relying on creatures with lifelink, is actually quite slim. Diamond Mare is a card that does synergize really well with Crested Sunmare. One of the facts being it actually is a horse and not a Pegasus or a unicorn. We've had a lot of these unicorn Pegasus printed in Dominaria and some other sets. This makes you scratch your head that it's not a horse, so it doesn't get the indestructible ability from Crested Sunmare. Diamond Mare will get that indestructibility from Crested Sunmare, which is relevant, as well as it does gain you the life the turn that Crested Sunmare comes into play if you name white with the Diamond Mare, and you'll create that 5/5 white horse creature token. So I'm liking Diamond Mare also paired with like in a Johnny's Pridemate type life gain deck, maybe throw Crested Sunmare on the high end, and voila, you have a horse kind of life gain tribal deck. On to my number 9. Number 9 is the new Conduit of Ruin, this being the Goreclaw Terror of Sisma. I know it's a flavor foul, and everyone's complaining about the first legendary bear does not actually work with other bears, has nothing to do with bears. In fact, most bears are 2/2s and won't even get the bonus from the Goreclaw. Goreclaw is a 4 mana for a 4/3 that has creature spells you cast with power 4 or greater cost 2 less to cast. And then whenever it attacks, each creature you control with power 4 or greater gets +1/+1 and gains trample until end of turn. So this is a pretty good card in Standard right at the moment because we already do have a green Stompy. Has a lot of synergy with cards like Verdurous Gearhulk, Ronus the Indomitable, Ghalta Primal Hunger, and the Territorial Allosaurus. What I like about Verdurous Gearhulk is for using cards that are coming out earlier than the Goreclaw, maybe a Merfolk Branchwalker that becomes a 3/2. The Verdurous Gearhulk can put it up to the 4 power, and then it will get the benefit when the Goreclaw does attack. Ronus synergizes also very well with Goreclaw, as Goreclaw reduces the cost of Ronus, as well as allows Ronus to then attack or block. Ghalta gets a lot of synergy from Goreclaw, as it reduces it by a whopping 6 mana, so Ghalta can come out very, very quickly with Goreclaw and any other creatures you have on board. Where I think that Goreclaw does shine is with Varric's Bladewing and Territorial Allosaurus, because this is on what we call on curve. So the Goreclaw comes out on turn 4 or turn 3 at the Mana Dork, and then on the next turn you'll have enough lands and the reduction from Goreclaw to actually cast Varric's Bladewing or Territorial Allosaurus with the kicker, so that the Allosaurus can fight that following turn. The Varric's Bladewing puts out 2 4/4s that then get the abilities that becomes 5/5s when Goreclaw attacks in, as well as get trample. So that is where the synergy really lies. I also think this is kind of a neat little card in a red-green mid-range or a red-green haste deck, as right after the turn after Goreclaw, you can cast cards like Glorybringer, Lathnu Hellion, Hazard the Fervent, Skizix, Crocodile of the Crossing, or Charging Monstrosaur. Ideally, cast multiples in that following turn and then swing in for a ton of damage, as they all have haste and all are reduced by the cost of Goreclaw and get the +1/+1 and trample. Last but not least, though, there are some cool little synergies in the format. There are cards like Demon Lord Belzenlock that it actually synergizes with, because you're looking for mana cost, converted mana cost, usually 4 or greater, and it reduces the cost of the Demon Lord Belzenlock. Turns self-assemblers into Legion Conquistadors for 4 Legion Conquistadors, so they'll cost 3 mana and you can go through your deck that way. Nahab the Eternal has some pretty neat little synergy with, because one of the problems with Nahab is you won't have any way to gain the mana the turn that Nahab comes out. Well, something like a Goreclaw can come down, and then you can cast a Nahab, you can swing in, maybe get some damage through, and then you have plenty of other mana to cast even bigger spells and reduce the cost of those creatures. But what I really like Goreclaw with is the Golden Guardian. So what's really cool about Golden Guardian is it reduces the cost of Golden Guardian to 2, and then you can immediately have it fight another creature. You can even kill your Goreclaw, and then you have a renewable resource of the create a 4/4 Colorless Golem artifact creature token every turn. Number 8 is more of a fun card that is probably more impractical than practical, but we now have 3 of these fling type effects in Standard, and this is Thud. So Thud is a 1 mana sorcery that is an additional cost to cast it. You have to sacrifice a creature, and it deals damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to any target. So now with Thud, we also have Fling, which is the instant version of this. And we also have a card called Heartpiercer Manticore that can sacrifice a creature when it comes into play, as well as has Embalm to have 2 Fling type effects. So I think with all of those put together, we can actually build a Fling deck. And Standard is also very rewarding right now for Fling type effects. We have cards like Ghalta Primal Hunger, a 12/12 that can be reduced quite easily. We have Metalwork Colossus, which is a 10/10 that is reduced by any artifacts you have out, including vehicles, which we'll talk about in a second. And we even have a legendary Traxos Scourge of the Krug, which is a 4 mana for a 7/7. So it's a very reasonable Fling target. M19 also gives us another 10/10 for 5 mana called Gigantosaurus, but that might be a little bit unreasonable with Heartpiercer Manticore or Fling having red in the converted mana cost. Where I think I'm going with this deck is more of the vehicle route, as it has the synergy with the Heartpiercer Manticore. Heartpiercer Manticore, when it comes into play, can then respond and crew a vehicle such as the Eridera Express, or if you have another creature, the Demolition Stomper, and then use its fling ability to fling right directly at your opponent's face. The vehicles in turn reduce the cost of Metalwork Colossus. You can then use Metalwork Colossus to fling at your opponent, and then sacrifice other artifacts to bring it back for the second fling target. Although I don't think this deck is necessarily going to be hitting any top 8 tables anytime soon, it is going to make for some fun streams where we win by flinging cards directly at our opponent's faces. Coming in at number 7 is a card that the MTG community has been talking about for competitive dredge. However, I'm going to look at this for standard, and this is Stitcher's Supplier. 1 mana for a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield or dies, you put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard. So I think it does exactly what a lot of the God Pharaoh's Gifts decks want to occur right now. It gives you an early blocker. It will then put 3 cards immediately when it comes into play, as well as once it does chump block, if you have the Gate to the Afterlife out, it will give you additional card plus the 3 more cards in your graveyard. This single-handedly could fill up your graveyard enough for the Gate to the Afterlife to then go find the God Pharaoh's Gift. So I've always liked my Marionette Master. I think it's the best deck that I've been able to brew, at least in the past couple of years, at least the most competitive, the one we've had the most success with. And I don't really like going heavier on the blue than heavier on the black. Like currently I build it with a very heavy blue, as we have cards like Chart of Course and Champion of Wits that are the best way to fill up the graveyard. However, I think this might push me over to going heavier into black, as then you can get 6 cards out of 1 and then find the Marionette Master combo a lot easier that way. So I'm looking forward to updating my list for the Marionette Master Metalwork Colossus combo, utilizing this very efficient dredge card. At number 6 and number 5 are 2 cards that I think are going to go in a very similar deck or actually be paired together, and this is Druid of the Horns and Satyr Enchanter. Druid of the Horns is a 4-mana 2/3. Whenever you cast an aura spell that targets Druid of the Horns, you create a 3/3 green beast creature token. So this is very similar to a Johnny's Chosen, except you get a little bit bigger of a token. However, you do have to target the aura at Druid of the Horns. Satyr Enchanter is very similar to SRAM, is whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you draw a card. What makes it different from SRAM, though, it's any enchantment, not just auras. So I think these two work very well together in a, maybe even an Anointed Procession deck, because the Satyr Enchanter will even draw a card off of Anointed Procession. And then you do have the synergies with the Cartouches and the Trial of Strength. For example, if you have a Cartouche of Solidarity, which targets the Druid of the Horns, you'll get a 1/1 warrior creature token, a 3/3 beast, as well as be able to return a Trial of Strength that has created a 4/2 beast to then be cast again, and maybe you've drawn cards off of every one of these cards that have been cast. So lots and lots of synergy for like an enchantment token based strategy. You can also just go the direct aura route. Currently in standard, I've messed around with some aura strategies. Right now I have a very aggressive list with the red-white auras. However, I think that these 2 cards can allow us to go green-white and go more of a mid-range and value-based strategy. You can still use cards like Danitha and SRAM and the Satyr Enchanter to get just a lot of reductions in value. We have auras like Conviction that can be a rinse and repeat, and there are plenty of other routes you can go with the various auras that exist in standard, and a lot of them being printed in M19. Satyr Enchanter, I think, is the more interesting of the 2 cards. That's why it's a little bit higher on the list, as I think you can go a different route with Satyr Enchanter, go sort of a green-white mid-range deck that uses all of the cards like the cast outs and the Seal Ways and the Ixalan's Bindings, and there's even another 4-mana one that's printed out of M19 that can take care of any threat on the board and still draw you cards. So you can maybe pair this with some Planeswalkers, really grind out the game, taking care of all your opponent's threats and drawing cards while doing so. So I think both Druid of the Horns and Satyr Enchanter are going to be a very welcome addition to standard. Earlier on in this video, we talked about Oketra's Monument and how it paired very well with Mentor the Meek. Well, we're getting a new toy as well out of M19 for Oketra's Monument that may push me away from the current Oketra's vampire strategy that I've been running to more of a value-based Oketra's Monument deck. And this card is Militia Bugler. It is a 3 mana for a 2/3 with Vigilance, and when it enters the battlefield, you look at the top 4 cards of your library, and you can reveal a creature card with power 2 from among them and put it into your hand. So where I like this is it has the synergy with the best card in Oketra's Monument, in my opinion, which is Angel of Invention. Angel of Invention is a 2/1 that you can find with a Militia Bugler. This also synergizes with Mentor the Meek, as we said before, and there's cards like Dusk Dawn that will destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater, which dodges Militia Bugler if you don't have any Angel Inventions out, and then gets them back with the Dawn side. So this Oketra's Monument deck is very resilient to board wipes. You can come back at any given time to a board wipe with just one Militia Bugler that then can find like a Legion Conquistador and then find even more cards, and you'll have an army assembled in no time. I also like this with Aviary Mechanic. Aviary Mechanic can then return the Militia Bugler back to your hand, and then you can recast it and find even more of an army to push through even mid-range decks or have enough chump blockers for aggro decks. And I think this is going to be, it might bring back Oketra's Monument into the realm of competitive play. At number 3 is another card that I think might push an archetype back into competitive play, and this is the Grixis Improvise, or just Improvise in general decks, and this is Sai Master Thoris. This is a 3 mana for a 1/4, which is relevant because it dodges Lightning Strike. And whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. For 2 mana, you can sacrifice 2 artifacts and draw a card. So it's going to give you a lot of fodder. With every artifact, you'll be able to basically draw a card by paying 2 mana, so you can find those cards you want. It's also going to allow you to get those big improvised cards like the Herald of Anguish out early, and also a synergy with cards like Marinette Master and Sly Requisitioner. Sly Requisitioner can be improvised out quicker, and then when you do sacrifice those non-token artifacts to draw cards, you at least will create back a 1/1 color serval artifact creature token that then can be sacrificed later down the road. In fact, all of these, the Marinette Master, the Requisitioner, and the Master Thopterist, could easily create a kind of little fun artificer deck that will have a lot of synergy between it. And Improvise has been a competitive deck in the past. You still have cards like the Maverick Thopterist will even bring out even more Thopter tokens, and it's almost there. It's been there for quite a while. Cards like Battle the Bridge can gain you a bunch of life, and War of Invention can find you specific cards. So this is a good inclusion to the standard meta at the moment. Coming in at number 2 is my favorite Elder Dragon from M19, and this is Arcades the Strategist. It is 1 and 1 of each of the bant colors for a 3/5 flying vigilance. Whenever a creature with defenders enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. Each creature you control with defender assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power, and can attack as though it didn't have defender. So this is a card that really wants you to go all out defenders. In standard right now, that is a little bit tricky, but there are some good 2-drop defenders in the form of Consulate Skygate, Wall of Forgotten Pharaohs, and Gleaming Barrier. I especially like Wall of Forgotten Pharaohs because you can use some deserts with the Wall of Forgotten Pharaohs to at least dish off some damage if you don't have Arcades the Strategist out. And then you have some other cards that are one-sided board wipes like the Slaughter the Strong or the Dusk Dawn. Dusk Dawn can then get back any of your walls that might have died to a opponent's board wipe. And a Slaughter the Strong is just a one-sided board wipe. You can keep your Arcades the Strategist, and your opponents will have to sack everything else, and all your walls will be fine because they have 0 power. However, I think Arcades is more interesting in Modern. Modern has a very aggressive curve right now with some walls that aren't that useless at the moment in the format. There are a lot of aggressive decks that these can just stonewall a lot of the more aggressive cards like Goblin Guides early, and then it can be used to make quick work of your opponents when they can swing in with cards like Arcades. There are also a few other cards that can allow them to attack. The better one is Assault Formation that then allows your defenders to attack. But at the 1-drop slot, you have cards like Jada Offshoot, Steel Wall, and Perimeter Captain that are very reasonable. 2-drop gets even more interesting with a couple cantrip cards like the Orator of Ojatai and the Wall of Omens. The Wall of Roots can allow you to ramp out the Arcades or give you the mana for your assault formation, and the Wall of Mulch can allow you to sacrifice any one of your walls that may be targeted by removal spells. The Overgrown Battlement is kind of cool. Again, it's another way to turn on the assault formation, and we even have a 0/6 for 2 mana in the form of Wall of Tanglecord. The 3-drop slot is even more interesting, with some flyers in the form of the Hover Barrier and a whopping Wall of Denial, which allows you a Defender Flying Shroud creature for 3 mana. And the Wall of Frost is a pretty good creature on the blocking end, but then can be a nice little attacker for just 3 mana. As well as we get the Carven Caryatid, which is a 3 mana for a 2/5 that draws you a card. So if you have Arcades out, that's drawing 2 cards off of it. Then you can put the effect of a card like Tower Defense that can give all your creatures +0/+5, and you only need to be swinging with a couple creatures to just finish off the game. So another card that was recently a joke might actually be able to see play, and that's Tree of Redemption, as it can swing in for a whopping 13 points of damage with either the Assault Formation and Arcades the Strategist. I'm also thinking Arcades the Strategist is going to make a very fun commander. Going back in the history of Magic, there are plenty of cards that work off toughness and a lot of defenders at that point. And I think Arcades is going to be the most interesting commander to come out of core set M19. Last but not least, but definitely the most janky card on my list, and the card that I by far want to brew a number of decks around, is the Archons Unsealing. This is totally a Kevin card, a 4 mana build around card, enchantment, 3 in a red. Whenever you cast a creature spell with power 4, 5, or 6, Archons Unsealing deals 4 damage to any target. Whenever you cast a creature spell with power 7 or greater, Archons Unsealing deals 4 damage to each opponent and each creature and planeswalker they control. So again, this is just a card that screams build around me. We already have Goreclaw that reduces the cost of creatures with power 4, and now Archons Unsealing can actually be used to be a win condition right then and there. Now putting the two together, it's kind of a they're cramping the same space. They work off each other though by reducing the cost of subsequent cards after the Goreclaw comes out. But I think the Archons Unsealing actually works independently of Goreclaw. There are some really cool red cards that don't cost a lot of mana that can come out, like the Lathnu Hellion for 3 mana to create a 4/4 haster and also deal 4 damage to any target. We have the Blood Rage Brawler, which has this nice little synergy with the Hollow One. If you even put the Blood Rage Brawler with the Monument, with the Hazoret's Monument, and then are able to discard a card off of it, you can cast the Blood Rage Brawler and the Hollow One for a whopping 2 mana and deal 8 damage or 4 damage to 2 different targets. And thing about Archons Unsealing, they even stack, so if you have even more of these, that's even more damage that's done off of these type of cards. Even cards like the Combat Celebrant is a very, very cheap card that you can come out for very reasonable mana. The Archons Unsealing also curves with one of the most played cards right now with Glorybringer, dealing basically 8 damage spread as you want. And if you go into other colors, it gets very, very interesting as well. Black is particularly interesting to me. You have cards like Wanted Scoundrels. That's 2 mana for a 4/3. You have the Amit Eternal, the Plague Belcher, the Bontu the Glorified, and the Baleful Amit, which is all 3 mana for creatures that will trigger off the Archons Unsealing. And even a card like Oval Chase Daredevil has some synergy with the artifact theme, as whenever an artifact enters the battlefield, you can bring back the Oval Chase Daredevil from your graveyard to your hand and cast it again to do even more damage with the Archons Unsealing. Coupled with the fact that you can even pair this with another monument called Bontu's Monument, and now it's doing at least 5 damage and gaining a life for each one of these creatures. On curve, by the way, you can go 3 from Bontu's Monument into 4 Archons Unsealing, and then just unload all of those Plague Belchers and Bontu the Glorifieds and those in one turn and just dish off a win condition there. So where I like this too is with green. Back to the green Stompy, Wayward Swordtooth, Steelleaf Champion, Prowling Serpopard, Ronus the Indomitable, and even other cards that, like the basically any dinosaur card, is going to trigger off the Archons Unsealing. Now, if we really want to get the most bang for our buck, we need to look for cards that have power 7 or greater, because that's when it deals 4 damage to everything. And there are some goodies here. The first one being Traxos, Scourge of the Krug. This is a card that is just going to wipe your opponent's board. And then if you just have to cast any other artifact to untap it, you can get in for another 7 damage the following turn. It's going to kill pesky planeswalkers and all the creatures they control. We have cards like Carnage Tyrant. That's probably the most reasonable with Sarkhan's Unsealing. 6 mana for a 7/6 that then will wipe the board. Can't be countered. Leads back to 7/6. Trampling card, very tough to deal with. And once again, the Gigantosaurus and Ghalta Primal Hunger are way above and beyond the required 7 power to trigger off the Sarkhan's Unsealing. There's also a card that is legal currently in Standard that is overlooked, which is Garrix Horde. That is a 7 mana for a 7/7. Trample, and you play with the top card of your library revealed, and you can cast the top card of your library if it's a creature card. So it's kind of like the Vizier, the Menagerie. There will be a lot of synergies with the Goreclaw and the Garrix Horde, with the Archons Unsealing as the win condition. Again, I don't expect too much with this particular deck, but when it works, it's really going to work. So that's my top 10 list of cards that I want to brew around from the Core 19. Now, many of you may have your own lists. I encourage you to build your own list, and in fact, if you have a particular card that you want to brew around, we are going to be doing the Rogue Master Brewer competition for Core 19. You can see that our Dominaria one just finished. We just crowned a winner for Dominaria. So be looking for our video that is going to be coming out for the primer for how to enter the Rogue Master Brewer for Core 2019. I'm really interested in seeing your lists. You may tell that my theme is very similar with cards like Thud, Sarkhan's Unsealing, and Goreclaw. I am really excited with these power 4 or greater type cards. I think that's going to be a very, very interesting little theme. There'll be a lot of mix and match with those particular cards. And maybe you other people have identified some other themes that I've overlooked. They'll be fun to brew around from the core set M19. All in all, I think this is a pretty fun synergistic set. My initial feelings about the set was it was just a way to push reprints in and was more of a needed hate cards in Modern. But after scouring through it, there are definitely some cards that are gems for brewers, and very synergistic, very fun cards to build decks around. So looking forward to seeing your list and looking forward to see your decks for the Rogue Master Brewer competition. This has been Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com. Thanks for watching.